it should be obvious that when you've got the leadership and the ideological drive for a movement coming from Marxist roots, it's going to end up being anti-Semitic.
Folks, as you know, social media censorship is growing. The best way to support our video work for Israel is to subscribe to our video newsletter on pulseofisrael.com and to share our videos. If you are already a subscriber, then thank you.
Shalom, shalom everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our eternal ancestral homeland, the land of Israel. Things are crazy on so many fronts, but I am really looking forward to speaking with Bruce Abramson, who I've spoken with before. Now, just to give you some background, Bruce is a PhD, a JD, a principal at B2 Strategic Center Fellow, and a director of ACEK Fund, and the author of a new book, which is called The New Civil War. And today we're going to be talking about a very important topic, which is why woke progressivism is anti-Semitic. So let's bring on Bruce. Shalom, shalom, Bruce. How are you today?
Shalom, Avi. Doing well, and it's a pleasure to be back with you. In fact, I wish I could be there with you.
Looking forward to hosting you for a one-on-one in person when you come, Bruce, when the day comes.
Yeah.
So, with all the craziness going on in the world, with the headlines or even without headlines, there continues to be this growth of Jew hatred within the progressive woke community. And you basically just wrote an article saying straight out that woke progressivism is anti-Semitic. So go right ahead. What are you trying to say? Why is it so clear-cut for you?
Well, you know, let me back up a little. I've been trying to understand the progressive movement for a long time. And the reason that I started was, like many, I would say, like the overwhelming majority of American Jews, I started out on the left wing of the Democratic Party. And about 20 years ago, I hit a point where, you know, I'd already come of political age. I was already in my 30s. There were a lot of issues that I knew a lot about before they became front page issues. And on issue after issue after issue, the folks that I was standing with were fundamentally wrong. And not only were they fundamentally wrong, but they weren't willing to listen to anything. They were not willing to listen to arguments that said, look, take the values we've all been espousing and look at them in this context, and you'll see that you're pushing in the wrong direction. And that got me interested in why there was this continuous stream. So I spent a long time studying progressivism from an American perspective, from a political perspective, from a social perspective, and from a Jewish perspective. And one of the things that I have come to understand is that it's not a collection of oddball policy stances. Right? It's not a bunch of people who wake up one day and say, a boy can announce he's a girl. And the next day they say, I hadn't really noticed any racism, but it's actually systemic. Right? It is a well-defined ideology, and it has core beliefs. It has things that it thinks of as good and as bad. The people out there who call themselves social justice warriors are, in fact, trying to make the world better, except that before you can make things better, you need a value system. And it's not my value system, right? Any more than the Taliban taking over Afghanistan thinks they're making Afghanistan a better place. I don't agree because I don't share their value system. So when we look at it from the perspective of progressivism, we have to say, what do they see as good and what do they see as bad? Now, let's go back. Let's take specifically the Jewish angle. Who are the Jews? Now, I'm not going to get into what makes someone a good Jew, what is Jewish belief, and what is Jewish theology, but literally and objectively, what are the Jews? And the answer is, we are an ancient nation that defines itself around the covenant with God, that has managed to stay distinct from the broader populations around it through many, many, many developments and trends, and that values its own traditions. Now, let's take a look at what progressives view as good and view as bad. Right? Nation. Right? Nationalism is a dirty word in the progressive lexicon. Now, I look at Israel. I always thought of Israel as an ethno-national state, like Hungary or Greece or many of the other states around the world, distinct from the United States. Nationalism, terrible word in the progressive lexicon. If you're a nation, if you identify as a nation, if you want your nation to be strong, that's bad. Next, covenant with God. Well, certainly, I've written elsewhere, I believe that progressivism is a new faith in formation, but it is certainly opposed to traditional notions of God. It is opposed to the Judeo-Christian notion of God. And whether you view progressivism as a radical secular movement or as a new religion, you can bet either way that they're not going to like the established notions of God. We've managed to remain distinct without assimilating. Well, again, that's a bad thing because progressivism works based on the notion of enlightened elite morality. Right? 30 years ago, it was perfectly moral to say marriage is between a man and a woman. A man may be a homosexual, but he can't become a woman. May even be a drag queen, but he's not a woman. Those things were all moral and acceptable. Oh, color blindness, like Martin Luther King, was a way of fighting racism. None of those things are moral anymore. It's not just that we've gone beyond them. They're now immoral. So the notion that we can remain distinct is a negative. And fidelity to tradition, well, no. When you live in a world of evolutionary morality, fidelity to tradition is a terrible thing. So everything that defines the Jews is viewed as a negative in progressivism. That was a long answer.
No, that's fine. And it's a very important introduction, because then I want to go to your article where you start out by saying, continuing your train of thought, anti-Semitism is rapidly becoming a core part of leftist identity in America. But you said it shouldn't really surprise anyone given the Marxist roots of woke progressivism. But many Americans, notably a sizable swath of Americans, Jews, and a majority of mainstream Jewish leadership, refuse to concede the obvious. So what is exactly that obvious, and why are Jewish leadership across the spectrum of the Jewish community, not just Reform and Conservative, but even Orthodox community, ignoring this?
Well, so it's obvious given its Marxist roots, because Marxism, in all of its variants, whether it's traditional economic class-based Marxism or the more contemporary Gramsci's work on cultural Marxism, posits different classifications of society, right? I mean, if everybody is either a worker or an owner, there's no room for Jews. Right? I mean, you can have Jewish workers and you can have Jewish owners, but if they're going to identify with each other, you're destroying the class stratification. Same is true culturally, right? If all of our definitions are cultural or race oriented, the Jews are either a distinct group or they're shattering the classification system. So, Marxism, from the days of Marx, has always been anti-Semitic. Right? There have certainly been Jews who thought that they could make a Jewish-friendly form of Marxism. But even then, it was because what they were trying to do is create sort of a post-Jewish friendly. Right? We're no longer Jews, we're Bolsheviks, and therefore we should be accepted as such. That much, it should be obvious that when you've got the leadership and the ideological drive for a movement coming from Marxist roots, it's going to end up being anti-Semitic. Now, why is so much of the leadership in this country, Jewish leadership in this country, refusing to admit it? A variety of different reasons. First of all, some of them are true believers. Okay, some of them really have bought onto the progressive value system. And what they're trying to do is shoehorn whatever vestigial Judaism they have left into that framework. So if they did face up to it, they would make the choice of what's more important to them, which is progressivism. Many of them are doing it because, quite frankly, it's lucrative. Right? I mean, if the ADL were to wake up tomorrow, were to stand up tomorrow and say, you know what, we completely missed the boat. All those years we've been soliciting money to fight anti-Semitism, it was rising under our noses. It's worst on the left. Yeah, you know, there are still some neo-Nazis out there, and we've been pretty good at chasing them down. But the big threat today is on the left. And, you know, we're kind of sorry we haven't alerted you to that until now. But boy, did we screw up. Now we'd like to solicit donations to the right thing. That would be the end of them.
Their own donor base would basically say, I don't want to part of this. You're right-wing extremists. Forget about it. No more donations to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So many of them are following. They're following their donor base. And they're also, I mean, a lot of it is throwing good money after bad. For better or for worse, Jews are overwhelmingly part of the intellectual class. And one of the hallmarks of the intellectual class is that we wrap our egos in being smart and right. Other people wrap their egos in different things. We say to them, the Jews aren't the fastest people on the planet. We say, okay. You say, yeah, there are a couple of Jewish models, but they're not the most beautiful people on the planet. We say, okay. You say Jews aren't the smartest people on the planet. Everybody starts bristling. The idea that our Jewish leadership and our Jewish community could have been wrong is a major blow to our egos where we feel it. This is true not just for the Jews, by the way, but for our entire intellectual class.
It's just very scary because it's not just like you wrote and we just spoke about how Jewish leadership is ignoring the anti-Semitism of the woke progressivism. It's that many Jewish leaders in America, and this is mostly in the Reform conservative community, I'm not talking about all Reform conservative Jews, I'm referring to their leaders and rabbis, have readjusted, redefined their Judaism and their Jewish values to be representative of this woke progressive culture, which, as you say, is inherently anti-Jewish and about the ultimate destruction of the Jewish people. And the people like me that were ripping our hair out. Like, wait a second. That's not Judaism. You want to? Yes, we believe in being nice to people. Yes, we believe in being nice to the stranger. And yes, we believe in respecting everyone. But changing a 3,000 plus year heritage of lifestyle and culture and religious traditions to fit exactly your worldview that just so happens to be a political perspective of every modern political value issue of the time, whether immigration, whether LGBTQ, whatever. That's Judaism to you? No, they're all wrong and taking their communities. I always say I have no problem with individual Reform and conservative Jews. They're fine. I love them. They're fellow human beings. I love all human beings, Jewish, not Jewish, doesn't make a difference. But I have a problem with their leadership, who they've totally misconstrued and redefined what their Jewish identity is supposed to be about and thrown it in lot with an ideology that is anti-Jewish.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is circular. A lot of it comes down to Judaism stands for good values. I have good values. I identify as Jewish. Therefore, my values must be Jewish values. But one of the things that I've been saying to people for years is that there is an easy test. Okay, there's an easy test to find out if, in fact, the notion that progressive values are Jewish values is accurate. And the test goes like this. If, in fact, there is a 3,500-year-old tradition that managed to get right what everybody else got wrong, and to arrive at the values of contemporary progressivism, which we know is the height of enlightened elite morality, then you would expect huge numbers of non-Jewish progressives to be beating down the door saying, we don't know how you got there thousands of years ahead of everybody else, but we want in. Right? You would expect the progressives who've developed these values on their own to look around and say, oh my God, the Jews got there thousands of years ago. We got to get into that club. To the best of my observation, that's not happening. And it's not happening because the whole argument is absurd.
Right. And to just flip your point in the other direction, not only is it not happening of having progressives say, oh, this is Judaism, we're in. And what I've been saying, and again, one of my big beefs to the leadership of the Reform conservative movement and of Jewish organizations is, by you redefining Judaism and the Jewish identity to align to your progressive political values, you are giving no reason for any young Jew to be Jewish. They do not have to be Jewish to believe in those values. They're just American or they're just progressives. And there is no reason for them to continue wanting to associate as a proud Jew, to go to synagogue, to go to Jewish day school. Why do I have to go to a Jewish day school to learn if I can learn these progressive values at any public or private school that is nothing about our 3,000-year heritage? So they're not only are they taking upon themselves this ideology that in itself is about the destruction of the Jewish people, they themselves are promoting this ideology to replace Judaism, in a sense, getting rid of their own future, of their own communities, their own families in their communities and next generation, etc., to even be associated with the Jewish people. And it boggles my mind.
Well, I agree with everything you just said, but there's a reason that argument can't be compelling. And that is that your argument is that what they're doing is bad for the Jews. And their argument is that what they're doing is good for the world. Okay? And here is, here is, here is the problem. If you think about after the Mashiach comes, but if the entire world accepted the Torah, all right, your argument is it would be bad to go out in the world. It's still important to remain part of the Jewish people. Now, maybe that's your argument, maybe it isn't, but it's not compelling to people who want to improve the world. Right? You've got a group of people out there whose position is the whole world has adopted Jewish values. We have to be part of this vanguard. And your argument is, well, but if you see yourself as part of the vanguard of the world, you stop seeing yourself as Jewish. And their response is, well, okay, we don't care if we're Jewish. We care that the world is a wonderful place. So you're arguing from your value. This is exactly the point that I started with. What you're doing is you're taking your values and saying, you over there, if you shared my values, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. Well, okay. But clearly, that's right. If they shared your values, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. Maybe it's time to say, these people don't share my values, and to ask yourself instead, what do they value?
Right.
And is there a way that I can approach them within that?
Right. No, 100%. That is definitely what I'm saying. And the message is that no, the progressive values are not Jewish values. It can be that some progressive values like crisscross with some values from Judaism, from the Jewish people in the Bible. But the way they are interpreting those values today, they're not Jewish values. They're progressive values.
Yeah, that's right. And there's another point of confusion that I think really harms the Jewish leadership and the broader leadership in America, and to some extent, I suspect, in Israel. And that is that there is a marked difference if you ask the question of where do the people who are today's progressives come from versus where do the ideas driving today's progressivism come from. Today's progressives, including much of the Jewish leadership, are basically mainstream status quo people. Right? I mean, even at the top of the American government, right? Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer did not rise through politics over the decades by being bomb-throwing firebrands. Right? There were good politicians who knew how to cut deals. They knew how to tell which way the wind was blowing. Right? There were a lot of Americans who said, oh, well, if Bernie Sanders was in charge, then I would see that it was radical. But Joe Biden, he's not a radical. And the answer is, well, that's true. That's certainly not the impression that he's conveyed for many decades. But he's leading a radical movement. The same is true inside the Jewish organizations. The folks running them are basically, they are temperamental conservatives. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to disrupt the way that anybody thinks about anything. They want to minimize tension. They want to keep a reputation for moderation and reasonableness. They want to keep the money flowing. They're always good. They have mastered the art of saying there is just enough of a crisis out there that if you keep money flowing to us, we can fix it. It's not so big that it's going to explode no matter what we do. It's not so small you have to do anything. It's right in that sweet spot where our unique brand of incrementalism can be helpful. And so if you look at where the people are coming from and where the leadership is coming from, it doesn't really seem all that frightening. You have to go back and look at where the ideas and the organizations are coming from. Now, when I talk about contemporary progressivism, I'm talking about a very, very recent movement. I mean, a 21st century movement. And the way to tag it is that the last leftist movement collapsed with the Soviet Union. Why were the 1990s such a good decade around the world? Answer: the Western left collapsed. It was absolutely shattered. But there were still a lot of pieces out there. I mean, when you shatter something, unless you clean it up, take it to recycling, you got a lot of pieces out there. It took them a decade or so to start regrouping. But there were a bunch of really, really important things that happened right around the year 2000. I'd say between about 1999 and 2001, that galvanized and reshaped the modern left. And the ones that I tag them at, and I don't know how many people still remember this, 1999, there were a series of WTO protests. Right? There were World Trade Organization meetings. This was when the WTO was still a young organization. And there were massive NGO protests outside that tore up the cities hosting WTO meetings in Seattle and in Geneva.
I remember that.
That was 1999. In 2000, you, of course, had the Bush-Gore election, which was a traumatizing event to large parts of America and was very badly misreported. And both of the parties lied about it, but it was just a tremendously shattering experience. Then you had 9/11, which scared a lot of people. And the worst thing about 9/11, from the perspective of the remnants of the left, was that they had no choice but to trust George W. Bush. And we had this momentary burst of unity and patriotism, but in fact, the way that I've described this is, you got to think of the left as a small child who's been traumatized because he's living with an abusive stepfather who beats him and pounds on him and knocks him around and calls him names and tells him he's worthless. And all of a sudden, a guy in a hockey mask wielding a chainsaw breaks into the house and you run to hide behind your stepfather. And in that moment, what you feel is love and gratitude until the immediate danger is past. And then you turn around and you are completely inconsolable. So the combination of the 2000 election and 9/11 and running behind Bush, I think, deeply traumatized these people. Then you had, actually finishing the week before 9/11, you had the Durban Conference. Mm-hmm. Which was supposed to be about human rights and hatred and freedom, and ended up being a massive promotion of anti-Semitism. But that galvanized a lot of the leftist movements, and it gave them a cause, and it gave birth to the BDS movement, which grew from there. So you had all these things coming together, and then you also had the two global catalysts in the background, which was the launch of the euro that unified monetary policy across most of Europe, and China's accession to the WTO, which brought China into the market. And all of these things came together to really galvanize a new leftist movement, which is what progressivism is today. And the fact that the Durban Conference was one of the core formational events and brought in many of these dynamic groups is completely lost on most American Jews. Right? The BDS is a central part of this movement. It's not a little fringe thing that a bunch of the guys who show up at some of our demonstrations like to push.
Interesting. That's a very interesting point. The other interesting dichotomy here is, while this whole progressivism is supposed to be about love, peace, respect, right? It actually has introduced to society, and all society, more hatred and division to everywhere. Like, I like the way I like to call out the Black Lives Matter, for instance, for example. Everyone who defines everything based on race, they are the racists. They turned every issue to be race. That is racist. I grew up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s where, while there might have been people who are racist, no issues were colored on the public sphere based on what color you are. We didn't worry about that. Again, the streets of New York City, were there white racists walking around down the streets? Of course. But on a daily basis, we worked together, we lived together, we went to schools together. There was no issue. Race wasn't an issue in the public sphere affecting our lives on a daily basis. Today, race is not just a public issue defining everything. It's every second of every moment, and every tweet, every TikTok, every Facebook post. It's enhancing division in society. It's enhancing hatred of the other. And I'm just using race as one example, but it's also a gender issue. They are coming in the name of love and respect and unity and creating more hatred, more division in society, within friends, within communities, within families. We were blessed to grow up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s where life was so much simpler on all these different levels. And again, you have these Jews and Jewish organizations swept up in this and promoting this division more and creating even more and more division by harnessing these issues, as opposed to, again, my Jewish value is God created all of us. I respect every creature who was created, every human being was created. I don't care what color you are, what gender you call yourself. I respect you as an individual. I have the right to disagree with you publicly. I will still love you as a human being, respect you as a human being. And if I cross and I disrespect you, it doesn't make a difference what color, gender, race, religion you are. I'm in the wrong. But that's a far difference from where today is. You just disrespect anyone who disagrees with you about any of these progressive values, and that's it, and you're delegitimized. That's not Jewish. That's not humane. That's not good for society.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a number of important issues in there. I mean, one is when you talk about how, the people talking about race all the time are most racist. I mean, first of all, all ideologies are ultimately hypocritical. Right? They all come out to solve problems, and they all create problems, and usually variants are the ones they claim to solve. So let's not pretend that that's unique unto progressivism. Second of all, I mean, specifically talking about issues like race and justice, something I discuss in great detail in the New Civil War, and that is that progressivism has deconstructed language. Right? So what happens is they stand up and say, look, everybody knows that racism is bad. There used to be 120, 150 years ago, there were people who were proud racists. Right? I mean, it was a perfectly acceptable in the late 19th, early 20th century. It was a perfectly acceptable ideology, and it was fine to stand up and say, I'm a proud racist, and fine to stand up and say, I'm a proud eugenicist. And in fact, Wilhelm Marr, who coined the term anti-Semitism, coined it for himself. He founded the League of Anti-Semites because he was proud of collecting all these fine, noble people who would stand against Jewish influence. Right? This was not a put-down. There were no negatives associated with it. Today, they're strictly negatives. Right? There are no proud racists anymore. So what the left has said, what the progressives said is, well, okay, racism has negative connotations. So let's think of something that we oppose and redefine racism to mean that. We'll think of something in the racial realm that we're against, and we'll just say that's racism. Right? It's easy. And they do the same thing with positive words like justice. If you look at it, and I had another piece, I had an article that just came out in American Greatness a week or two ago called The Great Awakening that has generated a lot of interest. I want to make clear that we are looking at the birth of a new great faith. I mean, you look at progressivism and their views, they have views that set themselves apart from any other faith or culture or tradition on issues related to sex, gender, race, justice, equality, economics. I mean, this is a whole framework. Now, the second point that you mentioned about life in the 70s, 80s, and 90s is interesting because certainly in the 70s, nobody was dancing around saying, times are great. In fact, there was a famous TV show called Good Times set in a Chicago tenement that was ironic in its naming. It was intentionally ironic. But what we did have, and this is one of the reasons that America has been so great to the Jews, is that there was a very, very unusual, in the annals of world history, movement that started picking up steam with the Protestant Reformation in Europe, and that the American founding really accelerated. And that is with partitioning off different parts of society. Right? Most famously, America, we refer to it as the separation of church and state. But if you look at Judaism, I mean, we know that at its core, Judaism is an entirely holistic, is an entirely holistic explanation of the world. Right? I mean, Judaism has rules about how you're supposed to get out of bed in the morning, how you're supposed to go to the bathroom, when you're supposed to take a day off, right? How you're supposed to have sex, how you're supposed to eat, what order you're supposed to consume your foods in a meal. I mean, it is a completely, there is no aspect of life, no aspect of your personal life, your individual life, you can look at and say, yeah, Judaism has really never had anything to say about that. You make anything you want, and there's no, there's never been an opinion, never been in a discussion. We got nothing. Okay? What the American system did was it said, you know what, we are willing to partition it out. We're going to have this system of governance and unity that will speak about only a handful of selected issues. And beyond that, we're going to leave it up to you to make your own decisions. And that freed the Jews up for all sorts of things. Now, it didn't necessarily free us up for anything. If there were a Jewish movement, you might call it an anti-Jewish movement, but if there were a Jewish movement that said, we want to start sacrificing animals again, that would run into, we know that would run into problems in the United States because you've actually got groups coming from different countries that have tried that, and it's been problematic. But the U.S. system has really partitioned things out and given us all a lot of individual freedom and a lot of communal autonomy, and then equality within the decisions that we make. Progressivism, to a large extent, is moving back in a more traditional direction. And by the way, it's not just Judaism that is that comprehensive. Speak to any Muslim and they'll tell you it's exactly the same thing. Islam prescribes every one of those things too. Right. Christianity was always a little bit more lax in many of those areas. But if you look back at medieval Christianity, I mean, might not have told you how to get out of bed in the morning, but they did tell you what your profession was going to be based on who you were and where you were born. And they told you where you were going to live the rest of your life. The feudal system was not exactly a bastion of freedom even if it let you choose the sequence of foods in your meal. Progressivism is going back to a more traditional viewpoint. They call it intersectionality, but it's holistic. Right? Progressivism prescribes how you have to see everything in the world, how you have to approach every encounter, what you have to see as the cause of justice, who you have to support. It is all-encompassing. And that means that anybody that says, I've gotten used to carving out this little niche over here where I get to do my own thing, or I get to join my own community, it is viewed as necessarily evil because you're rejecting the holistic worldview. And again, I don't think that people quite get that, but that's explicitly what intersectionality is. Interesting,
right? And you're explaining how it's one holistic movement replaces another holistic movement.
Yeah.
In a sense, what you're saying, why progressivism is therefore anti-Jewish, because it's replacing Judaism with its own holistic system. You can't be both. You can have Jewish values that might be progressive values, but your lifestyle as progressivism, that is an ideology that replaces your Jewish civilization and our basket of values.
No, absolutely. I mean, people talk about universal values. It's basically because, you know, you can pick any two traditions, any two faith systems, I mean, that had nothing to do with each other. Okay. I mean, you know, you could look at Judaism, Shinto, and Aztec faith, and I guarantee that you will find commonalities.
Right.
Because they're responsive to human needs. Right. So, you know, so yes, absolutely. There will be parts of progressivism that are completely consistent with traditional Judaism, that are completely consistent with traditional Christianity, that have no, but those are the coincidences.
Right. Right. And listen, just to sum up, I want to go to your conclusion, which is exactly like a build-up to what we were talking about. And you say straight out, contemporary woke progressivism is anti-Semitic because progressive values are the opposite of Jewish values. And you continue, the conflict is inherent, bad, and rapidly getting worse. So how can you sum this all up for us on that note and explain that?
Sure. Progressivism really is a new faith system. It's designed to give people what they need that they weren't getting in traditional faiths or that they walked away from in traditional faiths. It has a well-defined set of values. It has a well-defined set of views. It has a well-defined approach to the world. It's got notions of justice. It's got notions of gender. A lot of it is based on faith, right? I mean, you can't, as I've said to people before, yeah, you know, it's sort of hard to justify a lot of the nonsense that you're coming out of progressivism on the basis of faith. On the other hand, give me an empirical, rational explanation of exactly how Eve's listening to the serpent's advice about diet doomed man to a life of toil. Right? You either have faith in that story or you don't. You can't derive it from anything. And that's where progressivism is. Their values, they have an entire replacement morality. They have derived a morality from Marxist roots, filtered through other things that may coincide with Judaism, may coincide with traditional Judeo-Christian reality, may coincide with the principles of the American founding on certain select points. That's a coincidence. It is an entire replacement value system, and it doesn't like competition from old school religions. If you look at history, one of the most dangerous times to be living in is during the rise of a new faith. Because members of a new faith have to figure out what their canon is, they have to figure out what their creed is. They're arguing over how many angels could dance on the head of a pin, and they're willing to kill over it. And the one thing that they all have in common is they will go out and shatter the icons of the old-time religion to prove that their God is mightier.
So, but two clarifications. You said it is providing something that people are missing. What is it, that thing that people are missing that it's providing?
You know, and I say this as someone who decided as a teenager that I really had no need for a spiritual side. People have a need for a spiritual side. There are things in the world that can't be explained. And there's also a need for connection and community. You know, we all have a relationship with the unknown. You can call it whatever you want, but at some point in every human's life, they have had to make peace with questions like, what happens after you die? And where was my kid 2 years before he was born? Okay? These are normal questions, and we don't know the answers. You have to come up with some relationship with that. You also need a sense of community, of people you can gather with. I saw this living in Northern California. People create their own rituals that create their own spirituality. I knew people who would lambast the Christians they knew growing up who believed in snake handling and speaking in tongues, but would then very happily go ecstatic dancing in a grove under the moonlight, which is exactly the same thing as speaking in tongues. Right. I know people who blast the ignorant Christians who believe in the rapture and then go on about apocalyptic climate change, not realizing that it's the same story.
Very interesting.
Right? These seem to be human needs. Right? We need a place that we can go. You know, you may not think of it if you've grown up going to shul all the time, but you walk into a shul and you are in a room overrun with secret handshakes. Right? I mean, there is stuff. Everybody in the room knows when to say amen. Everybody knows when it's marginally acceptable to have a conversation, when you have to shut up, when it isn't. Okay, you know, I remember once being in shul in the middle of Kedusha. We could hear one of the guys singing "Prove It" all night, and he was quite embarrassed. Okay, but you know, it is a room where you can go in and tell stories about famous people that nobody outside that room ever heard of.
Right.
Okay, it is a club defined by secret handshakes with secrets that are well known to everybody on the inside and available, but almost completely unknown to everybody on the outside. And that creates a sense of belonging. And people have walked away from it entirely, crave that, and they need it. And so they create it on their own.
And the final question to the follow-up is, and what's the faith? They're leaving a faith in God, right? Of the Judaism, the God encompasses our life.
Yeah.
What's the faith in progressivism? What are they putting their faith in? Humanity?
No, they put it in ego. But they actually, I mean, really, they put it in enlightened elite opinion. Right? We have a group of, I mean, it is a faith not so much as in God as in the priesthood. Right? We have priests. We can go back to Plato, right? We have philosopher kings who hold themselves up in academia and in government and in think tanks and at the top of industry, who think long and hard about the cause of justice and come out raising consciousness about it. Right? I happen to agree that it's a problem to have any system that doesn't have an axiom, but it is very much a faith in the priesthood. You know, I keep going back to the idea that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton talked about how their thinking about gay marriage had evolved. That's exactly it. Right? That's exactly the point. 10 years ago, we were moral and upstanding, believing that gay marriage was wrong.
With even Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama being against it. Publicly,
right,
correct.
Right. This is what, and the word that they used was their thinking had evolved. Right? Back when the world was at this moral plane, so were we. Now that the world has evolved to this moral plane, we've gone there too. And on this moral plane, it becomes clear that it's immoral to prohibit gay marriage. Right? I mean, you can't just say, look, I changed my mind, or the politics changed. Or, you know, you can't say, look, I'm a politician. Okay, 10 years ago, this had 20% support. There's no way I was coming out for it. Now it's got 60% support. I can tell you, I always kind of wanted to go that way, but I didn't think it would be good for my career.
Right.
That's an honest answer.
Right.
That makes all kinds of sense.
Right.
But they can't say it because they can't just say the time has come for this excellent policy. They have to say, this is not a policy decision. This is human rights. This is morality. This is compelled by every sense of decency. And then you have to be prepared to answer the question of, well, where were you 10 years ago?
Right. What changed? Right. So, final question, again, going back to the progressivism is anti-Semitic line. Witnessing this snowball effect of the growth of progressive woke culture, or religion as you're expressing it, permeating every aspect of American society, meaning even organizations, corporations, in terms of training, schools, children being indoctrinated already at 2-3 years old about millions of genders. I mean, it's permeating across American society. Knowing that it in of itself is Jew-hating, what is the future for American Jewry?
Well, I don't know what the future is for America. I mean, most Americans don't want to admit it, but right now, today, as we speak, the United States is not a free society. The United States is not a constitutional republic, and the United States is not a global superpower. All of these things are demonstrable on today's headlines alone. And I'd be surprised if you could get 15 to 20% of America to agree with any of those three statements. Okay? The order as we know it is unraveling. And as with any unraveling, that is a precarious time for the Jews. I wish I could say something better, but, you know.
Nope, that is a very profound statement. I mean, I repeat it all the time. We have to learn from history. And that's it. Every great society has its heyday. The Jewish people have their heyday, and then a society unravels, and the first ones to get hit when all of society ends up getting hit. I mean, we're very familiar. The Jew is the canary in the coal mine, so everyone should wake up. Like, don't think that growth of acts of hatred against Jews, that you're safe if you're not Jewish. No, it's going to come to you too. Stand up and protect the Jew so that you'll be protected. By not standing up and protecting the Jew, you're letting it be open season when they come for you. So it's all very clear. It's all in the history books. And I guess we just hope and pray that people wake up and we don't repeat history, even though we're very familiar that humankind does allow history to repeat. We learn history and then we allow it to repeat because we don't internalize the lessons. On a happy note, Bruce, it is always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Avi. It's a pleasure to be here, and you just froze.
So, Bruce, it's a pleasure having you. And how do people buy your book?
You can go to my website, brucedabramson.com, and there are a whole bunch of links, or you can go right to Amazon and look it up, and you can find any of my earlier books there. Some of them talk about related issues, and I've actually got one on the Middle East that I wrote 5 or 6 years ago that lays the groundwork for what became the Abraham Accords.
Wow. Amazing. All right, Bruce, thank you so much. Stay sane, stay healthy, keep up your great writing. Looking forward to seeing more.
Thanks, Avi. Appreciate it.
All right. Okay, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this talk with Bruce Abramson. Fascinating, very important topic. So many important issues just within this topic itself. Listen, internalize, and share with others. Finally, anyone who hearing my voice from Israel, the Pulse of Israel, which is basically a non-politically correct voice coming out of Israel of what's going on to the Jewish people, the land of Israel, and the freedom-loving world, which big tech does not like to be heard out there. So there's growing censorship. Now, if you want to continue hearing and watching my videos and hearing my voice and the people I interview, please go to pulseofisrael.com and sign up for our newsletter. In the meantime, signing off from eternal and ancestral homeland, the beautiful Judean hills and the land of Israel. This is Avi Abel, and thanks for watching.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.